My name is Isabella Chin Rossi. I am 34 years old, a certified forensic archivist at the Chicago Historical Society, and I was standing in the walk-in closet of the home I had paid half the mortgage on, watching my mother-in-law dump my grandmother's pearls into a Tupperware bin like she was sorting old buttons. She was making room for her daughter's sweaters. The closet smelled of cedar and betrayal. Virginia Rossi, my mother-in-law, 62 years old, widow of a man who had been kind to me exactly once at my wedding, didn't look up when I walked in. She was humming, as if she were organizing a pantry. Next to her, on the velvet tray where my jewelry had lived for 3 years, sat a stack of folded cashmere. Size extra small. Not my size. My sister-in-law's. I said her name. Virginia. She turned. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She looked at the Tupperware in my hands, the one I had pulled out of the recycling bin, the one that still smelled of marinara, and she snarled. Not whispered. Snarled. These things don't belong in this house. I didn't cry then. I want to be honest about what happened inside me, because people think rage arrives hot. Mine didn't. Mine arrived cold, documented, and extremely organized. I walked past her, past the pile of sweaters that still had price tags from Neiman Marcus, past the empty velvet tray, and I opened the fire safe we kept behind the shoe rack. I pulled out a manila envelope. Inside, my grandmother's notarized inventory, the insurance rider from 1987, the prenuptial property schedule I had made David sign not because I didn't trust him, but because I had spent enough time in archives to know that love without paper is just a rumor. I handed Virginia the top sheet. She looked at it. Her face cycled through 3 colors. Then I took out my phone, scrolled to my contacts, and pressed one name. My lawyer. Rachel, I said, when she picked up on the second ring. I need you to come to Oak Park. Bring the camera. And bring the police liaison you told me about last month. Virginia's mouth opened. No sound came out. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard in that house. Welcome to Lady Payback Story, where we share family stories about quiet strength, firm boundaries, and the moment good people stop letting their heirlooms be treated like trash. If you've ever been the daughter-in-law whose presence was tolerated but whose personhood was negotiable, this story is for you. Leave a comment below and subscribe, because what happened next shocked not just my family, but the entire legal framework of how we define home. 03:00. Let me back up. You need to know who I was before the Tupperware. 03:06. I grew up in a 3-flat in Chinatown, Chicago, raised by my grandmother Maylin Chen and my mother, Lien. My father left when I was 4, and I don't remember his face. What I remember is the sound of my grandmother's bedroom drawer opening every Sunday morning. The click of the brass latch. The smell of camphor and silk. Inside that drawer was not jewelry in the American sense. It was a timeline. A 3-strand Akoya pearl necklace, given to her by her own mother in 1948, when they fled Shanghai. A sapphire ring, bought with her first paycheck as a seamstress in 1955. A diamond brooch, shaped like a peony, that my grandfather gave her on their 10th anniversary in 1962. She never wore them. She archived them. Date, provenance, condition, story. She was the first archivist I ever knew. Most people grow up with childhood memories of cartoon mornings and playground scraped knees. I grew up with archive gloves, handwritten ledgers, and stories stitched into every inherited object. Our Chinatown 3-flat was narrow, creaky, and lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, stacked with old newspapers, immigration documents, and family photographs tucked carefully into acid-free sleeves. While other kids collected stickers and toys, I learned to collect history, to honor lineage, to treat every family heirloom not as decoration, but as living proof of the women who'd fought, survived, and persisted before me. My grandmother's life was a masterclass in quiet resilience. She fled war-torn Shanghai as a young girl, carrying nothing but a small silk pouch holding those 3 pearls, crossing oceans and borders with her mother to build a new life in a foreign country. She spoke broken English for decades, worked 16-hour days in a cramped Chinatown seamstress shop, hemming wedding dresses and tailor suits for wealthy Chicago families who never knew her name, just to put food on our table and keep a roof over our heads. She faced discrimination, poverty, and loneliness every single day, yet she never complained, never wasted anything, never discarded a single thing that held family meaning. That was why she archived her jewelry so meticulously. For her, those pieces were not luxury items. They were survival capital. The pearls had gotten her through border crossings. The sapphire ring had paid our rent one brutal winter when her shop work dried up. The peony brooch had been her only frivolity, the only gift my grandfather ever saved up to buy her, a tiny symbol of joy in a life built entirely on sacrifice. She taught me that tangible family legacy was the only thing no one could ever take from you, that paper trails and preserved treasures were how marginalized women refused to be erased. My mother learned the same resilience, but she learned to let go instead of hold on. After my father abandoned our family without a single dollar of child support, my mother worked 2 jobs to raise me, cleaning office buildings overnight and folding dim sum wrappers at a local restaurant by day. She was tired, perpetually worn thin by survival, and she grew to view family objects as heavy burdens. She loved my grandmother fiercely, but she never cared for the jewelry, never wanted to hold on to physical reminders of the hard, painful years they'd endured. She believed memories lived in the heart, not in trinkets, and she made it clear from a young age that she did not want the heirlooms when my grandmother passed. So the legacy fell to me. I was the granddaughter who sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor every Sunday, listening for hours as she walked me through every scratch, every polish, every story attached to each piece. I learned to clean the pearls with distilled water and soft cotton to preserve their luster. I learned to store the sapphire away from direct sunlight to prevent fading. I learned never to touch the peony brooch's diamond setting with bare hands, to protect its vintage finish. I grew up understanding that these pieces were not mine to flaunt, but mine to steward, to protect, honor, and pass down intact to the next generation of Chin women. When I graduated high school with a full scholarship to the University of Chicago's Historical Preservation Program, my grandmother cried for the first time in my life. She told me that archiving was not just a job, but a duty. People forget the quiet stories, she'd said, brushing a strand of hair from my face. The rich and powerful write their own history. The rest of us have to save ours ourselves. That conversation shaped my entire career. I dedicated myself to forensic archiving, to restoring damaged records, to preserving overlooked family histories, to giving voice to the people the world would otherwise erase. When she died, 6 months before my wedding, she left me the drawer. Not my mother said she didn't need things to remember her by, but me. Bella, she said, the week before she passed, her hand on my cheek. These are witnesses. They watched me survive. They will watch you survive too. But only if you make people see them. I thought she meant literally. I didn't know she meant legally and emotionally until 3 years later that I met David Rossi at a fundraiser for the Historical Society. He was there because his firm had sponsored a restoration project. He was kind. He was steady. He had a laugh that sounded like a door opening instead of closing. We dated for 2 years. We bought a house in Oak Park, a 1912 American Foursquare with good bones and a bad roof. I paid 40% of the down payment from my grandmother's savings bond. He paid 60% from his inheritance. We were equal on the deed. I thought that meant something. David was the first person outside my family who ever saw me fully. He admired my career, respected my dedication to historical preservation, listened endlessly to my stories about my grandmother and our family's immigration history. He never made me feel like my obsession with legacy was strange or excessive. He'd sit with me for hours while I sorted old documents, bring me tea while I worked late archive shifts, and tell me I was brilliant for devoting my life to saving forgotten stories. For the first time, I felt seen, cherished, and unapologetically myself. I fell in love with him slowly, steadily, not for his last name, his money, or his family's status, but for his quiet goodness. He was calm where I was meticulous, easygoing where I was guarded, warm where I had spent years protecting my heart. After a childhood rooted in survival and single-woman resilience, I craved the stability he offered. I craved a partner, a home, a family that chose me instead of tolerating me. When we decided to buy our Oak Park home, I poured every penny of my grandmother's lifelong savings bond into the down payment. That money was not just cash, it was my grandmother's blood, sweat, and decades of seamstress labor. It was the safety net she'd built for me, the future she'd sacrificed everything to give me. I invested it in our home because I believed in our marriage, believed we were building a mutual life, a shared legacy, a space where both our histories would be honored equally. What I didn't understand then was that I wasn't just marrying David. I was marrying the Rossi family narrative. And in that narrative, there were two kinds of women, the ones born with the name, and the ones who married in. The first kind were assets. The second kind were tenants. Polite, useful, temporary. No matter what the deed said, that I learned this truth slowly, in small, unassuming cuts that accumulated over years, too subtle to fight at first, too constant to ignore in the end. The Rossi family operated on a rigid, unspoken hierarchy, one rooted in generational entitlement and old-world Italian family politics. Blood surname trumped marriage vows, birthright trumped legal deed, and the needs of the biological Rossi children always outweighed the needs of the daughter-in-law who'd joined the family. Virginia had spent her entire life embodying this hierarchy. She'd married into the Rossi name as a young woman, endured her husband's quiet neglect for decades, and found her sole purpose in elevating her two biological children above everyone else. She saw herself as the gatekeeper of the Rossi legacy, the protector of all things, family property, and she viewed me as an outsider, someone who had married into the family, who had no Rossi blood, who therefore had no inherent right to equal standing in their home, their space, or their lineage. From the very start of our relationship, she treated me with icy politeness, the kind of courtesy that feels like a locked door. She never asked about my childhood, never inquired about my grandmother's story, never praised my career or my accomplishments. She only ever commented on what I lacked. I wasn't loud enough, I wasn't social enough, I wasn't focused enough on building a real family with David. My academic success, my career accolades, my family's hard-won legacy never registered to her. I was simply the woman who'd married her son, a temporary addition to the Rossi household. Virginia Rossi had a phrase. She used it at Thanksgiving. She used it at my bridal shower, when she rearranged the seating chart to put her daughter Sophia at the head table and me at the cousin table. She used it the day we moved into the house, when she walked through the front door with her own key. David had given her one, for emergencies, and opened the hall closet. "This is a Rossi house," she said. "Not your house. Not our house. A Rossi house. And in a Rossi house, things find their proper place." That single sentence haunted me for 3 years. I heard it in every snub, every boundary violation, every time my space was encroached upon and my belongings dismissed. A Rossi house. Not mine. Not ours. Always theirs. On my bridal shower day, I'd spent months planning every detail, inviting my friends and family from Chinatown, hoping to blend my two worlds and feel fully accepted. But Virginia rearranged the entire seating plan without asking me, placing Sophia beside David at the honorary table while I sat squeezed between distant cousins I'd never met. When I'd quietly mentioned it to David that night, he'd brushed it off as his mother's old-fashioned hospitality, said she just wanted Sophia to feel included. He never saw the insult, never recognized that his mother was publicly diminishing my place in my own pre-wedding celebration, never acknowledged that she was drawing a clear line between blood family and me. The day we moved into our Oak Park home, the violation was even more blatant. We'd spent weeks packing, decorating, curating every corner of our new space to feel like a mutual home. I'd hung my grandmother's old silk scarves in the entryway, displayed her vintage teacups in the kitchen, filled the bookshelves with my archive books and family photo albums. But Virginia showed up unannounced with her key, marched through the house critiquing every one of my choices, and declared the space a Rossi house before I'd even finished unpacking my boxes. I should have heard the grammar. I was an archivist. I knew that pronouns were politics. But I was in love. And I was grieving my grandmother. And I told myself that Virginia was just old-fashioned, that she'd warm up, that the next dinner would be the one where she asked about my work instead of asking when I was going to start a real family. I gave her endless grace, the same grace I gave everyone who failed to see me. Grief softens your boundaries. After losing my grandmother, the only person who'd ever fully cherished my lineage and my identity, I was desperate for new family warmth. I wanted David's family to love me, to accept me, to make me feel like I belonged somewhere after my greatest loss. I ignored every red flag, every microaggression, every power play, convinced that kindness and patience would eventually earn me equal standing. Sophia Rossi was 28, divorced after 11 months, and had moved back into her mother's house in Elmhurst. Or so I thought. What I learned, gradually, was that her mother's house had become a fluid concept. Sophia's mail came to our house. Her Amazon packages stacked up on our porch. Her dry cleaning hung in our laundry room. She had a key. She had a habit of stopping by when David was at work and I was downtown. Sophia was the opposite of me in every way. She'd grown up coddled, entitled, and shielded from every form of hardship. She'd never worked a job that didn't feel like a hobby, never sacrificed for anything, never had to build anything from scratch. Her short marriage had ended because she refused to compromise, refused to share responsibility, refused to adjust her lavish lifestyle for partnership. After her divorce, she fell into a perpetual state of self-pity, convinced the world owed her comfort, stability, and luxury without effort. Virginia enabled every ounce of her daughter's entitlement. She viewed Sophia's divorce and subsequent depression as a lifelong trauma that excused every selfish choice, every boundary violation, every imposition on our lives. To Virginia, Sophia's comfort was a family priority, while my peace, my boundaries, my personal property were entirely negotiable. The first invasion was small. A drawer in the guest bathroom. Sophia left her makeup there. I moved it to a basket. The next week, the basket was back. I mentioned it to David. He sighed. "She's going through a hard time, Bella. Can you just make some space?" I made space. I always made space. That was my role. The daughter-in-law who didn't make waves. The archivist who filed her own grievances under pending. I hated conflict. Growing up in a single-income, grief-prone household, I'd learned early that peace was more important than pride. I'd watched my mother swallow every insult, every hardship, every unfair slight to keep our small family stable. I'd inherited that same people-pleasing instinct, that desperate need to maintain harmony at all costs. So I made space. Over and over and over again that I told myself a bathroom drawer was trivial. I told myself Sophia was hurting, that temporary kindness was worth temporary discomfort. I told myself David deserved a peaceful family dynamic, that I shouldn't be the difficult wife who caused tension with his mother and sister. I buried my small frustrations, labeled them overreactions, and let the first boundary fall without a fight. Then it was the guest room. Sophia needed a place to crash after a fight with her boyfriend. 2 nights became 2 weeks. Her clothes migrated from the suitcase to the closet. I found a pair of her shoes under our bed. I asked David to set a deadline. He said he would. He didn't. Virginia came over to help Sophia settle in. She brought a casserole and a set of matching hangers. She reorganized the closet while I was at work. When I came home, my winter coat was in the basement storage, and Sophia's fur-trimmed parka was on the hook by the door. That was the first time the invasion felt intentional, malicious, and permanent. It was no longer a few makeup items left in a guest bathroom. It was a deliberate replacement of my space, my belongings, my place in my own home. Virginia didn't just help Sophia unpack, she actively removed my property to make room for her daughters, rewriting the hierarchy of our household while I was away working my full-time job. That I came home that night to a house that felt suddenly foreign. My favorite wool coat, the one I'd saved for years to buy, the one that kept me warm through brutal Chicago winters, was stuffed in a dusty basement storage bin, forgotten and crumpled. In its place hung Sophia's expensive fur parka, a luxury item she'd bought on a whim and refused to store at her mother's house. The message was clear: my comfort, my belongings, my space were secondary to Sophia's convenience. When I confronted David about it that night, he grew defensive. He said I was overreacting, that it was just a coat, that his mom was just trying to help Sophia feel at home. He refused to see the pattern, refused to acknowledge that his family was slowly taking over our home, refusing to respect my equal ownership. He chose family harmony over my boundaries, yet again, and I let it happen. That I stood in the hallway that night, looking at that parka, and I felt something shift. Not anger. Inventory. I started a folder on my phone. Photos. Dates. Notes. I told myself it was just for my own sanity. In reality, I was building a case before I knew there would be a trial. As an archivist, documentation was my instinct. When the world around you refuses to acknowledge truth, you write it down. You date it, photograph it, preserve it. You create a paper trail that no one can deny. That night, I began cataloging every boundary violation, every overstep, every imposition. I photographed Sophia's accumulating belongings, logged every unannounced visit from Virginia, noted every time David ignored my discomfort to prioritize his family's wants. That I didn't do it out of malice. I did it out of self-preservation. For 3 years of marriage, I'd been gaslit into believing my feelings were unfounded, that I was too sensitive, that I was creating drama where none existed. My new folder was my quiet rebellion, a record of every truth my family refused to see. Here is what you need to understand about the jewelry. It wasn't about money. The insurance appraisal puts the collection at $47,000, but that's not the number that matters. The number that matters is 3. 3 pieces. 3 witnesses. The pearls, the sapphire, the peony. I kept them in our bedroom closet, in a locked fire safe behind my shoe rack. The combination was my grandmother's birthday. David knew it. I had told him the first month we were married, because I believed marriage was a vault with 2 keys. I'd trusted David completely with my most precious legacy. I'd shared the story of every piece, showed him the probate documents, walked him through the insurance appraisals, and told him exactly why these items were irreplaceable to me. I'd given him the safe combination freely, believing that mutual trust meant mutual protection. I never imagined he would hand that sacred code over to his mother, never imagined he would let anyone access the one space in our home that held my most cherished family history. I wore the pearls once a year, on my grandmother's birthday. I wore the sapphire on our anniversary, because she had worn it on hers. The brooch I never wore. It was too heavy, too bright, too much like her voice. It sat in the safe, watching. Each wear was a ritual, a quiet act of remembrance and gratitude. On my grandmother's birthday every year, I'd fasten the pearls around my neck, light a stick of sandalwood incense, and sit quietly, honoring the woman who'd given me everything. On our wedding anniversary, I'd wear the sapphire ring, linking my marriage vows to my grandmother's decades-long commitment to love and perseverance through hardship. The brooch stayed locked away, too precious, too full of her joy and struggle to risk losing or damaging it in daily life. Virginia knew about the jewelry. I had made the mistake of showing her the pearls at Christmas, the first year. I thought if I shared the story, she would see me. See where I came from. See that I had a lineage too, even if it didn't end in a vowel. She had held them for 3 seconds, then handed them back. Very ethnic, she said. Then she asked Sophia to pass the mashed potatoes. That offhand, dismissive comment cut deeper than any argument ever could. She reduced my entire family's immigration story, my grandmother's survival, my most sacred heirlooms down to a single, othering adjective. Ethnic. As if my history was foreign, inferior, unworthy of respect in her Rossi household. In that moment, I knew she would never value what I cherished. She would never honor my lineage the way I honored hers. She saw my heirlooms as odd, outdated trinkets, not sacred witnesses to a family's survival. After that, I stopped sharing. The safe stayed locked. The jewelry stayed hidden. I told myself they were secure. I told myself that a locked door in a house I co-owned was enough. I was wrong. Security is not a lock. Security is a boundary that someone else agrees to respect. And Virginia Rossi had never agreed to respect anything with my name on it. For years, Virginia had been testing my boundaries, pushing further and further each time I relented. She'd helped herself to my kitchen appliances, borrowed my clothing without asking, rearranged my furniture during unannounced visits, and commented constantly on my strange Chinese family traditions. Each time I let it slide, each time David refused to intervene, she learned that my space, my property, and my identity were all fair game for her family's convenience. The Tuesday it happened, I was at work. I was in the basement archives, wearing cotton gloves, examining a water-damaged ship's manifest from 1843. My phone buzzed. A notification from our Nest camera. Motion detected. Master bedroom. I almost ignored it. We had a cat. The cat was old and fat and rarely moved. But something made me open the app. My archive days were slow, methodical, deliberate. I spent my hours restoring faded ink, mending torn paper, and piecing together fragmented historical records, focused entirely on the fragile, forgotten stories in front of me. I was in my element, calm and centered, completely unaware that my home was being violated, my most precious treasures being discarded like trash. I always muted work notifications except for critical alerts, but the Nest Motion alert was set to priority, a setting I'd enabled months prior after a string of small neighborhood break-ins. I'd almost swiped it away, assuming it was our lazy cat waddling across the bedroom floor, but a sharp, instinctive unease stopped me. An archivist's intuition, you learn to notice when something is out of place, even from miles away. The video loaded in grainy segments. I saw Virginia walk into the frame. She was carrying a laundry basket. Not suspicious in itself, she had taken to helping with our laundry, which meant she went through our drawers and commented on my underwear choices. But she didn't head for the bathroom hamper. She walked to the closet. She knew the code. Watching that footage felt like watching a slow-motion violation of my soul. I watched her move with practiced familiarity through my personal space, no hesitation, no guilt, no respect. She knew exactly where the safe was, exactly how to access it, exactly what she was going to do. She'd clearly planned this invasion, waited for me to be at work, waited for David to be out of the house, so she could dismantle my boundaries without pushback. She knelt down in front of the safe, input the combination I'd trusted David with, and opened the lock with ease. In that moment, every ounce of trust I'd placed in my husband fractured. He hadn't just given his mother a house key. He'd given her access to my most private, sacred, irreplaceable belongings. He'd handed her the key to my legacy, and never once warned me, never once protected me. I watched, my gloved hands frozen over the manifest, as Virginia opened the closet door. She moved my shoes, 3 pairs of them, kicked aside like trash. She knelt. She opened the safe. She took out the velvet tray. She looked at the pearls. She looked at the sapphire. She looked at the brooch. Then she stood up, walked out of frame, and returned with the Tupperware. She handled my grandmother's 60-year-old heirlooms with the careless roughness of someone sorting garbage. No gloves, no care, no reverence. She stared at each piece not with admiration or respect, but with judgment, assessing whether my family's legacy was worthy of space in her son's house. Then she fetched a cheap plastic Tupperware container, the kind we used for leftover marinara sauce, and prepared to dump my irreplaceable history inside it to make room for her daughter's disposable cashmere sweaters. I was already running. I stripped off my gloves. I told my supervisor I had a family emergency. I drove the Eisenhower Expressway at speeds I will not confess to a court of law. I called David. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted, "Your mother is in our bedroom. She has my grandmother's jewelry. Come home now." Nothing. Panic and cold rage tangled in my chest as I raced home. I'd spent 3 years compromising, accommodating, making space, and this was my reward. My boundaries completely erased, my legacy disrespected, my home invaded by the family I'd tried so hard to love and belong to. I called David repeatedly, desperate for him to intervene, to choose me, to protect our home, but he ignored every single attempt to reach him. Later, I learned he'd been in a work meeting with his phone on silent, fully oblivious and fully unwilling to prioritize my safety and my property over his job. I pulled into the driveway. Sophia's car was there. A silver Audi I had helped her shop for 2 summers ago, back when I still thought being useful would earn me a seat at the table. I ran up the porch steps. The front door was unlocked. I could hear voices upstairs. Virginia's. Sophia's. They were laughing. The sound of their laughter was the final breaking point. They were in my bedroom, violating my space, destroying my legacy, and celebrating it. They saw my loss, my history, my most precious treasures as a joke, as a trivial sacrifice for Sophia's convenience. The cruelty of it, the casual entitlement, the unbridled disrespect took my breath away. I took the stairs 2 at a time. The bedroom door was open. The closet light was on. And there was Virginia, standing in a pile of my shoes, holding the Tupperware in one hand and a stack of Sophia's sweaters in the other. The velvet tray was empty on the floor. The pearls were in the bin. The sapphire was in the bin. The brooch was pinned to Sophia's sweater. She was standing in front of the full-length mirror, admiring herself. She didn't see me at first. She was turning her hip, watching the light catch the diamonds. "It's a little old lady," she said to Virginia. "But I could get it reset. Make it modern. Maybe a pendant?" Sophia's casual disregard for the brooch's history was staggering. She had no idea the decades of survival woven into that piece, no care for the woman who'd sacrificed everything to own it, no respect for the legacy she was wearing as a disposable fashion accessory. She planned to alter a 60-year-old family heirloom, to erase its original design and meaning, just to suit her fleeting aesthetic preference. To her, it was just old jewelry. To me, it was my grandmother's life. Virginia saw me in the mirror's reflection. Her eyes met mine. She didn't drop the sweaters. She didn't put down the bin. She turned around, slowly, and she smiled. Not a guilty smile. A victorious one. In that smile, I saw everything. She'd done this on purpose. She'd waited for the perfect moment to strip me of my last remaining family legacy, to put me in my place, to prove once and for all that in her Rossi house, my history, my belongings, and my boundaries meant nothing. She was proud of herself for prioritizing her biological daughter over me, proud of erasing my presence to make space for Sophia's permanent residency. Bella, she said. "You're home early." I was just helping Sophia organize. She's been so depressed since the divorce, and I thought, new space, fresh energy. You understand. You're so good at organizing. She said the word like it was a disease. She mocked my career, my character, my meticulous, honorable work as an archivist, twisting my greatest strength into an insult. She reduced my life's purpose, my dedication to preserving history, down to a trivial household chore, all while justifying her theft and violation as organizing. I walked past her. I didn't look at Sophia. I knelt on the floor and I picked up the Tupperware. The pearls were tangled. The sapphire was at the bottom, already scratched against the plastic. I felt the scratch more than I saw it. It was a sound that lived in my teeth. The physical damage mirrored the emotional damage perfectly. The pearls, carefully rest-wrung and polished every year for decades, were knotted and tangled, their delicate surface scuffed from rough handling. The vintage sapphire ring, preserved in perfect condition since 1955, now bore a permanent scratch on its band, irreversible mark of their careless disrespect. In that plastic bin, my grandmother's perfect, unbroken legacy was damaged, diminished, and disrespected. I stood up. "These are my grandmother's," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice I used when I told a donor that their generous offer to store their mildewed raccoon pelts in our climate-controlled vault was declined. Virginia laughed. The same laugh David had. A door opening. But this time, it was opening into a room I didn't want to enter. "Bella, sweetheart," she said. "You're a Rossi now. Rossi women don't cling to old trinkets. These things don't belong in this house. They belong in a museum. Or a garage sale. Sophia needs the closet space. She's moving in. She dismissed my irreplaceable legacy as old junk, fit only for a garage sale or a museum, unworthy of space in my own bedroom closet. She invoked my married surname to demand compliance, insisting that my new family identity required me to abandon my old family history, to discard the only treasures my grandmother had ever left me. The sentence landed like a beam dropping. Moving in? For a while, Sophia said, finally turning from the mirror. The brooch caught the light. My grandmother's peony, riding the hip of a woman who had never worked a day she didn't complain about. Mom said I could have the guest room full-time. And this closet. You have so much space, Bella. You don't even wear these things. Sophia's entitlement was breathtaking. She assumed my space was hers for the taking, assumed my most precious belongings were useless because I didn't wear them daily, assumed my life and my legacy existed solely to accommodate her comfort. She had never contributed a single dollar to our mortgage, never lifted a finger to maintain our home, never respected my boundaries for a single day, yet she felt fully entitled to take over my closet and discard my heirlooms. I looked at the empty velvet tray on the floor. I looked at the Tupperware in my hands. I looked at Virginia, who was still smiling, still holding Sophia's sweaters, still standing in the wreckage of my boundaries like she owned the demolition permit. And I felt it. The click. The same click Sophia Parker felt when she added up her Excel column. The same click Claire Bennett felt when she opened her father's toolbox. It was not rage. It was inventory. It was the sound of a woman finally cataloging the damage. For 3 years, I'd logged every small hurt, every boundary break, every disrespectful slight. For 3 years, I'd compromised, accommodated, and forgiven. For 3 years, I'd let the Rossi family chip away at my identity, my space, and my legacy, convinced that love and family harmony were worth the sacrifice. In that moment, the inventory was complete. The damage was total. And I was done sacrificing that. I set the Tupperware on the dresser. I walked out of the closet. I walked past Sophia. I walked to the hallway, to the built-in linen cabinet where I kept my document box. I unlocked it. I took out the manila envelope. I returned. I'd kept that envelope in my home from the day I married David, prepared for exactly this kind of violation. As an archivist, I knew better than to trust anyone with my most valuable assets, even my husband. I'd kept every legal document, every probate record, every insurance form, every prenuptial clause organized and preserved, just in case the day came when someone tried to steal or diminish what was mine. Virginia was still talking. Something about family harmony and not making a scene. Sophia was taking selfies in the mirror, the brooch glinting. I stood in the doorway and I cleared my throat. They turned. Virginia, I said. You're right about one thing. These things don't belong in this house. They belong to me. Legally. Personally. Exclusively. I pulled out the first sheet. This is the notarized inventory from 2009, filed with the Cook County Probate Court when my grandmother died. Item 1, 3-strand Akoya pearl necklace, circa 1948. Item 2, sapphire ring, Cartier, 1955. Item 3, diamond peony brooch, Tiffany, 1962. All bequeathed to Isabella Chen, sole beneficiary. I pulled out the second sheet. This is the insurance rider on our homeowner's policy. Schedule of personal property. These items are listed under my name only. Not joint property. Not marital assets. Mine. I pulled out the third sheet. This is the prenuptial agreement, signed by David and witnessed by his attorney. Section 4, premarital property remains sole property. He initialed it. You watched him do it, Virginia. You said it was smart at the time. You said, protect the Rossi assets. You didn't think I was protecting mine too. I laid every legal truth bare, cold and unarguable. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I didn't emotionalize. I simply presented the paper trail, the documented proof, the undeniable facts. For years, Virginia had hidden behind family rhetoric, behind blood right, behind the unspoken rules of Rossi entitlement. But paperwork doesn't care about family names. Law doesn't care about generational favoritism. Facts don't bend to anyone's arbitrary sense of ownership. Virginia's mouth opened. Closed. Opened. No sound. For the first time in 3 years, Virginia Rossi had no words. Sophia lowered her phone. The brooch suddenly looked very heavy on her hip. The arrogant smiles faded from both their faces, replaced by shock and panic. They'd never expected me to fight back, never expected me to have legal proof, never expected the quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law to dismantle their entire power play with 3 sheets of paper. They'd grown so used to my compliance that they'd forgotten I was trained to preserve, defend, and enforce truth. I took out my phone. I scrolled. I pressed. Rachel answered on the second ring. "Rachel," I said. "I need you to come to Oak Park. Bring the camera. And bring the police liaison you told me about last month. I have a breaking and entering. A theft. And a woman wearing stolen property who won't take it off." Virginia found her voice. It was a shriek, thin and high, like a nail being pulled from wet wood. "You wouldn't dare. This is a family matter." "David would never." "David isn't here," I said. "And even if he were, he doesn't own this conversation. You're in my bedroom, in my closet, in my safe. You took property worth $47,000. You damaged it. You gave it to your daughter. And you did it on camera." I pointed to the smoke detector in the corner. The little green light. "Nest records everything, Virginia. Even the things you think happen in the dark." The silence that followed was the silence of a vault ceiling. Rachel arrived in 20 minutes. Officer Daniels, the community liaison, arrived in 25. Sophia was crying by then, the brooch finally unpinned, lying on the dresser like a dead flower. Virginia was sitting on the edge of my bed, her face the color of old plaster, saying over and over, "This is a misunderstanding. This is a family matter." They crumbled instantly when faced with legal consequence. The entitled arrogance melted away into fear and denial. Sophia cried not out of guilt for hurting me, but out of fear of getting in trouble. Virginia repeated the same empty phrase, "family matter," over and over, desperate to turn a criminal theft into a trivial household dispute to avoid police involvement. Rachel looked at the Tupperware. She looked at the scratched sapphire. She looked at the camera footage I had already airdropped to her. Then she looked at Virginia. "Mrs. Rossi," she said. "Your daughter-in-law is being extraordinarily generous by not pressing charges for felony theft right now. But I'm going to need you to sign something." It was a voluntary property return form. A promise to vacate the premises. And a handwritten apology, which Rachel insisted be written in front of the officer. Virginia's hand shook as she wrote. The pen scratched. The words were illegible. But they existed. They were dated. They were witnessed. What happened next shocked the whole family. But not in the way you think, that I didn't press charges. Not because I forgave her. But because I understood something that took me 3 years to learn. In the Rossi family, punishment was just another form of attention. If I had Virginia arrested, she would have become the martyr. The mother-in-law persecuted by the cold Chinese daughter-in-law. The narrative would have shifted from her crime to my cruelty. I refused to give her the stage that I knew exactly how her family's toxic dynamics worked. They thrived on drama, on victimhood, on painting outsiders as cruel and unreasonable. If I'd pursued felony charges, Virginia would have spent months telling every relative, every friend, every neighbor how I'd ruined her life over old junk, how I was a cold, ungrateful wife who destroyed family harmony for petty revenge. She would have twisted my justice into my flaw, and I would have spent forever defending myself. Instead, I did something worse. I archived her. That I sent one email. To David. To Sophia. To Virginia. CC, Rachel. Subject line, house rules. No adjectives. No adverbs. Just bullet points. 1. Virginia Rossi's key to the Oak Park property is revoked. The locks will be changed by 6 p.m. today. Any attempt to enter will be treated as trespassing and documented for a restraining order. 2. Sophia Rossi's belongings will be packed and placed on the porch by 8 p.m. She has 24 hours to collect them. After that, they will be donated to Goodwill. I will photograph the packing for inventory. 3. The jewelry will be professionally assessed for damage. Any repair costs will be billed to Virginia Rossi. Payment is due within 30 days. Failure to pay will result in a small claims filing. 4. David and I will attend marriage counseling. Attendance is non-negotiable. If he chooses not to attend, I will retain separate counsel and begin proceedings to protect my assets and my person. 5. This is not a negotiation. This is a finding of fact that I scheduled the email for 6 p.m., when David would be on the train home. Then I sat on the front porch with the Tupperware in my lap, and I untangled my grandmother's pearls. One by one. The knots were tight. My fingers ached. It took an hour. By the time David's car pulled into the driveway, the pearls were smooth in my palm, warm from my skin, and the Tupperware was in the recycling bin where it belonged. I sat alone on my porch for that hour, undoing the knots they'd made of my legacy, undoing the years of compromise I'd wasted on a family that would never respect me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. For the first time in my marriage, I was not a wife, not a daughter-in-law, not a people-pleaser. I was just me, Isabella Chen, steward of my family's legacy, protector of my own boundaries, owner of my own home. David read the email on his phone, standing in the kitchen. I watched his face. He went through the same cycle his mother had. Shock. Denial. Anger. Then, finally, something I hadn't expected. Shame. He'd spent 3 years blind to his family's toxicity, 3 years prioritizing their feelings over mine, 3 years dismissing my every complaint as overreaction. But when he read the cold, factual list of rules, when he saw the legal documentation, when he understood exactly what his mother and sister had done, the truth finally landed. He saw the years of boundary breaks, the endless impositions, the deliberate disrespect he'd enabled with his silence. That she was in our safe. He asked if she knew the combination. I said. The same one I gave you. The same one you must have given her. He sat down. Hard. The chair creaked. I didn't think she would. Bella, she's my mother. She was just trying to help Sophia. She's been depressed. Don't, I said. Don't tell me about Sophia's depression. Don't tell me about your mother's good intentions. They took my grandmother's legacy out of a locked safe and put it in a plastic bin so a grown woman could store her sweaters. They pinned a 60-year-old diamond to a hip and took selfies. There is no version of help that makes that okay. He put his head in his hands. What do you want me to do? I had prepared for this question. I had rehearsed it in the shower, in the car, in the archives where I handled fragile things that other people had damaged. I want you to choose, I said. Not between me and her. Between silence and witness. You've been silent for 3 years while your mother treated me like a tenant. I need to know if you can see me. Really see me. Or if I'm just another item in the Rossi house that needs to make space. He didn't answer that night. He slept in the guest room, the room Sophia had been occupying, the room that still smelled of her vanilla perfume. I slept in our bed, the pearls on the nightstand, the safe open and empty. I didn't lock it. I wanted to see if he would try it. He didn't. In the morning, he made coffee. He set 2 mugs on the table. He sat across from me, and he said, I called a locksmith. They'll be here at 9. And I called my mother. I told her she's not welcome here until she apologizes. Really apologizes. Not a, I'm sorry you feel that way. A real one. I looked at him. And Sophia? Sophia can stay with Mom. Or get a job. Or both. I told Mom I'm not funding her anymore. I'm not her backup plan. And I'm not yours. He reached across the table. He didn't touch me. He touched the pearl necklace. These are beautiful, he said. Will you tell me about them? The real story. Not the one you tell at Christmas to be polite. I did. I told him about Shanghai. About the seamstress shop. About the peony and the anniversary. I told him about the Sunday mornings and the camphor and the brass latch. I told him that when I married him, I thought I was bringing all of that into this house. But instead, I had been hiding it. Because I was afraid that if he saw how heavy my history was, he would ask me to set it down. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't say, but my mother. When I finished, he said, I'm sorry I gave her the combination. I'm sorry I gave her a key. I'm sorry I gave her permission to treat you like a guest. You're not a guest. You're my wife. And this is your house. Not a Rossi house. Our house. It was not a perfect moment. It was a beam settling. It creaked. It groaned. But it held. The family, of course, exploded. Virginia told everyone I had threatened her with jail. Sophia posted on Instagram a vague story about toxic in-laws and materialistic people. The aunts called. The cousins texted. The family group chat, named Rossi Strong, lit up with accusations. Bella overreacted. Bella doesn't understand family. Bella thinks she's better than us because she has a degree. I did not respond. Not once. I did not screenshot. I did not forward. I did not defend myself to people who had never asked me a single question about my life before that day. I let the official version circulate. I let them build their narrative without me. Because the day you start pleading your case in a group chat is the day you admit that their opinion has a floor plan in your life. And I was done giving them square footage. But here is what I did do. I took the jewelry to a conservator. The sapphire had a scratch on the band. The pearls needed restringing. The brooch was intact. Sophia had been too afraid of damaging it to pin it properly. The total repair cost was $3,400. I sent Virginia an invoice. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. She didn't pay. Not for 3 weeks. Then, on a Tuesday, a check arrived in a Hallmark envelope with a card. The card had a picture of a sunset and a pre-printed message about forgiveness. The check was signed in shaky blue ink. She didn't write, "I'm sorry." She wrote, "For the trouble." I deposited it. I scanned it. I filed it. Then I sent her a thank you note. 1 sentence. Received. Filed. Best, Isabella. That it was the perfect petty gesture, the final small, hollow win she could cling to, offering transactional compensation instead of genuine remorse, hiding her humiliation behind a generic greeting card and a dismissive note. She thought she was settling the score on her terms, softening her wrongdoing with a performative message of forgiveness that was never meant for me. But I didn't take the bait. I didn't argue, didn't lash out, didn't beg for the apology I deserved. I simply documented every last detail, closed the case, and severed the emotional hold she'd tried to maintain over me. Petty people always lose to archivists. They fight with feelings, grudges, and passive-aggressive gestures. I fight with records, dates, and permanent proof. Her half-hearted repayment and empty niceties weren't a victory for her. They were just one more piece of evidence I added to my file on how little the Rossi family understood respect, accountability, or legacy. In the months that followed, the resetting of our life was quiet, deliberate, and unshakable. The new locks on our home held firm, no more unannounced keys, no more uninvited intrusions. Sophia moved out for good, forced to rent her own apartment and build a life independent of her mother's endless coddling and my household space. Her stacks of packages, her leftover belongings, her constant unscheduled visits vanished entirely from our home. David kept every single one of his promises. He attended every marriage counseling session without complaint, sat through hard, honest conversations about his years of silence and willful blindness. He learned to spot his family's entitled patterns, to push back against their unfair demands, and to prioritize our marriage over blind familial loyalty. He no longer defaulted to defending his mother and sister, no longer asked me to make space at the cost of my peace and my identity. Slowly, he began to truly understand the weight of what I'd protected. He'd sit with me on Sunday mornings, just as my grandmother once did, and listen patiently while I tended to the heirlooms, cleaning the pearls, polishing the restored sapphire ring, caring for the peony brooch. He learned their stories, memorized their history, and treated them with the quiet reverence they deserved. He stopped seeing them as mere jewelry and started seeing them as the living, breathing legacy of the brave women who shaped me. Our house stopped being a Rossi house that I was merely allowed to occupy. It became ours. Equal parts his steady warmth and my hard-won resilience, a home that honored both of our lineages without diminishing either one. I rehung my grandmother's silk scarves, redisplayed her vintage teacups, and placed the restored heirloom jewelry back in the safe, this time, with new locks, new boundaries, and a partner who would always guard them alongside me. That I never did reconcile with Virginia. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful apology, no heartfelt family healing. She still tells relatives I am cold, unforgiving, and overly rigid. She still frames me as the outsider who destroyed her family's peace. But I no longer care about her narrative. I no longer need her approval to belong, to be worthy, or to feel at home. I learned the greatest lesson my grandmother ever tried to teach me: your legacy is not preserved by kindness alone. It is preserved by boundaries. By documentation. By refusing to let anyone reduce your history, your trauma, or your identity to something disposable for someone else's convenience. Love without paperwork is just a rumor. Family without respect is just a house full of strangers. And the quiet, organized, unyielding strength of knowing your own worth, that is the only heirloom no one can ever take, damage, or diminish. If you've ever softened your edges, hidden your legacy, or swallowed your truth to keep a family calm, stop. Your boundaries are not unkind. Your documentation is not cruelty. Your refusal to shrink yourself for others is the greatest honor you can give the people who fought to make you who you are. If this reminded you of an accounting you were afraid to do, take it as a sign. And go for it. If you know a woman who's been the family's bank for too long, share this with her. Leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.